The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence of the Texas night, and Thaddeus Zane was already reaching for his rifle before his boots hit the floorboards. Someone was in his barn, and in the summer of 1882, thieves were as common as rattlesnakes in this dusty stretch of land just outside Pinon, New Mexico territory. He had worked too hard rebuilding this ranch after his father's death 3 years ago to let some drifter walk away with what little he had left. The moon hung heavy and full over the sprawling landscape as Thaddeus moved silently across the yard, his heart beat steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. At 28 years old, he had learned to keep his wits about him when trouble came calling. The barn door stood slightly ajar, and he could hear movement inside, the nervous shuffling of his horses telling him someone was definitely there. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his rifle, his eyes adjusting to the darkness within. A figure moved near the back stalls, and Thaddeus raised his weapon. The moonlight streaming through the broken window caught on something pale, fabric perhaps, and he called out in a voice that brooked no argument. "Step into the light with your hands where I can see them, or I will shoot." The figure froze, then slowly turned. As the person moved into a shaft of moonlight, Thaddeus felt his breath catch in his throat. It was not a man but a woman, her hands raised, her face streaked with dirt and what might have been tears. She wore a traveling dress that had once been fine but was now torn and dusty, and her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her shoulders in wild tangles. "Please do not shoot," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I am not a thief. I am sorry about the window. I tripped over a bucket trying to find shelter." Thaddeus did not lower his rifle. In his experience, desperate people did desperate things, and a woman alone on the frontier was often more dangerous than a man because she had to be. "Shelter? You picked a barn that belongs to someone. That makes you a trespasser at best." "I know how it looks," she said, her hands still raised, "but I have been traveling for days and my horse went lame 5 miles back. I walked here following the fence line and I saw the light from your house. I was going to knock on the door, but then I heard you moving around inside and I got frightened. I thought maybe I could just rest in the barn until morning and then introduce myself properly." "Introduce yourself for what purpose?" The woman's face, even in the dim light, showed confusion and something else, a flash of fear. "Are you not Thaddeus Zane of the Rocking Z Ranch?" He felt his stomach tighten. Nobody had called his property by that name in years, not since his father had died and the ranch hands had drifted away to find work elsewhere. "I am. Who are you, and how do you know my name?" She slowly lowered her hands, reading something in his tone that told her he was not going to shoot. "My name is Rebecca Rothman. I came from St. Louis. I am supposed to be your bride." The rifle nearly slipped from Thaddeus's hands. He stared at her, his mind racing back 6 months to a night when he had been drinking whiskey alone in his empty house, staring at the letters his father had kept in a wooden box. Among them had been an advertisement for a bride service, women seeking husbands in the Western Territories. In a moment of loneliness and whiskey-fueled courage, Thaddeus had written a letter. He had included details about his ranch, his age, his circumstances, and then he had sealed it and sent it off before he could change his mind. That had been in January. By February, he had regretted it. By March, when no response came, he had convinced himself it was for the best. By April, he had forgotten about it entirely, buried under the work of spring branding and fixing fences damaged by winter storms. Now it was late June, and standing in his barn was a woman claiming to be the bride he had given up on. "I never got a letter saying you were coming," he said finally, lowering the rifle but not putting it down. "I sent 3, Rebecca said, her voice gaining some strength now that she was not staring down a gun barrel. "The first in March when I received your letter and agreed to come. The second in April with my travel plans. The third just 2 weeks ago from Santa Fe when I arrived in the territory." "Did you receive none of them?" Thaddeus shook his head slowly. "The mail does not always get through out here. Sometimes the stage gets robbed. Sometimes the mail clerk in town just forgets to sort things proper. I have not been to town in near a month anyway. Been too busy with the cattle." Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, and Thaddeus noticed for the first time that she was shivering despite the warmth of the June night. Shock, he realized, or exhaustion, or both. Whatever his doubts about her story, she was clearly in need of help. "Come up to the house," he said, his voice gentler now. "You can clean up and eat something. Then we will figure out what is what." She followed him across the yard, keeping a respectful distance, and Thaddeus found himself hyper-aware of her presence behind him. His home was a simple structure, 2 rooms with a loft above, built by his father when he first claimed this land back in 1865. It was not much, especially for a woman who had traveled all the way from St. Louis expecting to find a proper rancher with a proper ranch. Inside, he lit a lamp and gestured to the wash basin in the corner. "You can clean up there. I will make some coffee and see what I have for supper." As Rebecca washed the dirt from her face and hands, Thaddeus busied himself at the stove, stoking the fire that he kept banked overnight and putting a pot of coffee on to boil. He found some leftover cornbread and beans, not fancy but filling, and set them on the rough wooden table that served as his dining area. In the better light, he could see Rebecca more clearly. She was probably 23 or 24, with dark brown eyes and a strong jawline that suggested determination beneath the current exhaustion. Her hands, when she reached for the cup of coffee he offered, showed calluses and old scars, the hands of someone who knew work. "Tell me about your journey," he said, sitting across from her at the table. "Start from St. Louis." Rebecca wrapped her hands around the tin cup, drawing warmth from it, and began to speak. Her voice was steady now, gaining confidence as she told her story. "I am originally from Philadelphia. My parents died of fever when I was 17, and I went to live with my aunt in St. Louis. She was kind enough, but she had 4 children of her own and little room for another mouth to feed. I worked as a seamstress for 3 years, saving what I could, but the wages were low and the work was hard. When I saw the advertisement for the bride service, it seemed like an opportunity for a different life." "What made you answer my letter specifically?" Thaddeus asked. He had been deliberately vague in his description, not wanting to oversell a situation that was far from ideal. "Honestly." Rebecca met his eyes directly. "You were honest. Most of the letters I received painted these grand pictures of prosperous ranches and easy lives. Yours said you had a small operation, that you were rebuilding after hard times, that you needed a partner more than you needed a decoration. That appealed to me. I have never been afraid of hard work, and I do not have grand illusions about what life is like out here." Thaddeus felt something shift in his chest, a small crack in the wall he had built around himself over the last 3 years of solitude. "So you left St. Louis when?" "Late May. The journey took 3 weeks by train to Santa Fe, then another week trying to arrange transport to Pinon. The stage only runs once a week, and I missed the first one. When I finally made it to Pinon 2 days ago, I hired a horse and a guide to bring me out here, but the guide turned out to be less than reliable. He left me on the road yesterday morning, said he had gotten a better offer to take some miners up to the hills, and that I could follow the road myself. The horse went lame this afternoon, and I have been walking ever since." "That would be Tom Haskins," Thaddeus said, anger rising in his voice. He is known for being unreliable, but that is low even for him, leaving a woman alone on the road. I managed, Rebecca said simply, though I will admit I was frightened. I saw some riders in the distance this afternoon, but they did not come close enough for me to tell if they were friendly or not. Thaddeus frowned. There had been reports of rustlers in the area, and just last week, the sheriff had ridden out from Pinon to warn the outlying ranches to be vigilant. You were smart to keep away from them. Did they see you? I do not think so. I hid behind some rocks until they passed. They talked for another hour, the conversation gradually becoming less interrogation and more genuine exchange. Rebecca told him about her life in Philadelphia before her parents died, about her father who had been a bookkeeper and her mother who had kept a small garden. Thaddeus found himself telling her about his father, about how they had built this ranch together, about the cattle operation they had started to run before a bad winter 3 years ago had killed half their herd, and his father had died of a heart attack shortly after. So you have been running this place alone since then? Rebecca asked. Mostly. I hire a hand or two during branding season, and sometimes a kid from town will come out to help with fence mending for a few dollars, but day to day it is just me. That must be lonely. The word hit him harder than he expected. Lonely. Yes, that was exactly what it was. He had not admitted it to himself in those terms before, had just called it being self-sufficient, being independent. But the truth was, the silence of the ranch had become oppressive, the empty house a constant reminder of what he had lost. It is, he said finally. That is why I wrote that letter in the first place, though I will admit I had second thoughts almost immediately after sending it. Do you still have second thoughts? Rebecca asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that made him look at her more carefully. I do not know, he said honestly. This is all happening very fast and not at all like I imagined it would if you ever actually showed up. I thought there would be letters back and forth, time to get to know each other from a distance before you made the journey, not you showing up in my barn in the middle of the night like a refugee. Rebecca smiled slightly, the first smile he had seen from her. I admit this is not how I imagined it either. I thought perhaps you would be at the stage depot in town to meet me, or at least that I would arrive in daylight and have time to compose myself before we met. What did you think when I pointed a rifle at you? I thought I had made a terrible mistake and was going to die in a barn in New Mexico, she said, and there was a hint of humor in her voice now. But then you started asking questions instead of shooting, and I figured you were at least a reasonable man. Thaddeus found himself smiling too, the expression feeling strange on his face after so long. I am glad my reputation for reasonableness preceded me. So what happens now? Rebecca asked. I know this is not the arrangement either of us expected, if you want me to return to St. Louis, I will understand, though I will need to work in town for a while to earn the train fare. No, Thaddeus said, surprising himself with the firmness of his response. You came all this way based on a promise I made. It would not be right to send you back just because the mail failed to get through. But I think we should take some time to get to know each other properly before we make any permanent decisions. Would that be acceptable to you? Rebecca nodded, relief evident on her face. That seems wise. Thank you. You can sleep in the loft tonight, Thaddeus continued. It is not fancy, but it is clean and there is a good mattress up there. Tomorrow I will ride into town and speak to Reverend Matthews about our situation. He is a sensible man, and he will know how we should proceed. As he helped Rebecca gather some blankets and showed her the ladder to the loft, Thaddeus felt the first stirrings of something he had not felt in years. Hope. This woman who had crashed into his life so unexpectedly might actually be the answer to the loneliness that had been eating away at him. Or she might be a disaster in the making, Only time would tell. The morning sun woke Thaddeus earlier than usual, its light streaming through the window at an angle that told him he had slept past dawn. He sat up with a start, disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous night. A glance at the ceiling confirmed that Rebecca was still there, or at least that her belongings were. A worn leather satchel sat at the base of the ladder. He dressed quickly and went outside to start the morning chores, feeding the horses and checking the fence line near the house. The broken window in the barn reminded him that last night had not been a dream, and he made a mental note to ride into town for glass to repair it. When he returned to the house, Rebecca was awake and had made coffee. She had also, he noticed, swept the floor and done the dishes that had been piling up near the wash basin. She wore the same dress as last night, but she had mended the tears and cleaned it as best she could. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the cleaned kitchen area. "I am used to keeping busy, and it seemed like the least I could do." "I do not mind at all," Thaddeus said, accepting the cup of coffee she poured for him, "though you did not need to feel obligated. It was not obligation, it was habit, and maybe a little bit of wanting to feel useful." They ate a simple breakfast of eggs and cornbread, and then Thaddeus announced his intention to ride into Pinyon to speak with the Reverend. "It is about an hour ride. Do you want to come with me, or would you rather rest here?" "I would like to come," Rebecca said. "I need to collect my trunk from the hotel if it ever arrived, and I should return the horse I hired, or at least pay for its care since it went lame while in my charge." The ride into town gave Thaddeus a chance to see Rebecca in daylight on horseback. She rode well, comfortable in the saddle, and kept pace with him easily despite riding one of his older, gentler horses. They talked little during the journey, but the silence was not uncomfortable. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, rocky hills dotted with pinyon pines and juniper. And in the distance, the mountains rose blue and hazy against the morning sky. Pinyon was small even by New Mexico Territory standards, a single main street with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and a handful of other buildings. The railroad had not come here yet, and probably never would, which meant that it remained a sleepy little town that served the ranchers and miners in the surrounding area. Thaddeus led Rebecca to the church first, a whitewashed building at the end of the street. Reverend Matthews was in his garden, tending to tomato plants, and he looked up with surprise when he saw Thaddeus approaching with a woman. "Thaddeus Zane," the Reverend said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I have not seen you in town for weeks. Who is this?" "This is Rebecca Rothman from St. Louis," Thaddeus said. "She came here to be my bride, but there has been some confusion with the mail, and I am hoping you can help us sort out the proper way to handle the situation." The Reverend's eyebrows rose, but he was a man who had seen much in his years serving frontier communities, and he simply nodded. "Come inside, both of you. Let us talk." In the cool interior of the church, they explained the situation to Reverend Matthews. He listened carefully, asking occasional questions, and when they finished, he sat back in his chair and regarded them both thoughtfully. "This is an unusual situation," he said finally, "but not unheard of. Many marriages out here begin as practical arrangements that grow into something more. The question is whether both of you are willing to enter into this commitment with open hearts and honest intentions." "I am," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I came here knowing it would be a practical arrangement, but hoping it might become more over time. If Thaddeus is willing to give that time, I am." "I am willing," Thaddeus said, though he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "But I want to do this right. I do not want either of us to feel trapped or obligated beyond what is fair." Reverend Matthews nodded slowly. "Then here is what I suggest. You two should spend the next few weeks getting to know each other as you would have through letters. Live in separate spaces, court properly, and see if you are truly compatible. If at the end of that time you both feel that marriage is right, I will perform the ceremony. If not, Rebecca, I will help you find work in town or arrange passage back to St. Louis, whichever you prefer. That seems more than fair, Rebecca said. But where should Rebecca stay during this time? Thaddeus asked. The hotel charges more than is reasonable, and I do not know that it would be proper for her to stay at the ranch even in separate quarters. She can stay with Martha and me, the Reverend said. We have a spare room, and Martha has been saying she could use help with her preserving now that it is summer. Rebecca, if you are willing to help Martha with her household work and perhaps some sewing, she would be happy to have you. That way you can earn your keep while you and Thaddeus get to know each other. Rebecca's relief was visible. I would be very grateful for that arrangement. They spent the rest of the morning settling the details. Rebecca's trunk had indeed arrived at the hotel, and Thaddeus paid the storage fee to retrieve it. The horse she had hired was at the livery, being tended by the stable owner who was happy to be compensated for the animal's care. By noon, Rebecca was settled in the spare room at the Reverend's house, and Martha Matthews, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, was already showing her the kitchen and talking about jam recipes. Thaddeus rode back to the ranch feeling oddly unsettled. Part of him was relieved that Rebecca was in town where she could be properly cared for and chaperoned. But another part of him, a part he was only beginning to recognize, had enjoyed her presence in his house that morning, had liked seeing the kitchen cleaned and having someone to talk to over breakfast. Over the next week, Thaddeus found excuses to ride into town almost daily. Sometimes it was to purchase supplies he needed. Sometimes it was to attend Sunday services, and sometimes it was simply to visit Rebecca and see how she was settling in. They would walk together through the town or sit on the porch of the Reverend's house and talk, their conversations ranging from practical matters to deeper questions about their hopes and dreams. Thaddeus learned that Rebecca had a quick wit and a practical mind. She asked intelligent questions about ranching, about the land, about what it took to run a cattle operation. She did not shy away from talk of hard work or difficult times, and she seemed genuinely interested in the life he led. Rebecca learned that beneath Thaddeus's stern exterior was a man who felt deeply and hurt deeply. He spoke of his father with reverence and grief, of the ranch as both a burden and a legacy he was determined to honor. He was honest about his struggles, about the financial difficulties and the constant work that left little time for anything else. "Why did you not remarry after your father died?" Rebecca asked one afternoon as they walked along the creek that ran behind the church. Surely there were women in town who would have been interested. There were a few, Thaddeus admitted, but most of them wanted a prosperous rancher with a big house and hired help. When they saw what my life actually was, they lost interest quickly. And truthfully, I was not ready. I was angry at God for taking my father, angry at the world for being so hard, and I did not think I had anything to offer a wife beyond bitterness and work. What changed? Time, I suppose. And one night of weakness when I was tired of being alone and thought maybe the answer was out there somewhere, just not in Pinyon. "You still think I am the answer?" Rebecca asked, and there was no teasing in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Thaddeus stopped walking and turned to face her. "I think you might be, but I do not want to put that burden on you. You are not here to fix my life or fill some hole in my heart. If we do this, we should do it as partners, two people choosing to build something together." Rebecca smiled, and it transformed her face, making her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness. I would like that very much." As the days turned into weeks, their courtship deepened. Thaddeus began to look forward to his visits to town with an anticipation that surprised him. He found himself thinking about Rebecca while he worked, wondering what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she was having second thoughts. For her part, Rebecca seemed to settle into life in Pinyon with remarkable ease. She helped Martha with household tasks and quickly became known in town for her skill with a needle. Several of the local women brought her sewing and mending, and she began to earn a small income of her own, which she saved carefully. One day in mid-July, Thaddeus arrived in town to find Rebecca in conversation with Tom Haskins, the guide who had abandoned her on the road. Thaddeus felt his temper flare and strode over to them, his face dark with anger. "You have some nerve showing your face to her after what you did," he said, his hand instinctively moving toward the pistol at his hip. "Thaddeus, it is all right," Rebecca said quickly, stepping between them. Tom came to apologize. "I am sorry, Miss Rothman," Tom said, his hat in his hands and his face red with shame. "I should not have left you on that road. I was thinking only of the money those miners were offering, and I did not consider the danger I was putting you in. I am glad you made it safe to the ranch." Thaddeus wanted to hit the man, wanted to make him pay for his carelessness, but Rebecca's hand on his arm stopped him. "He has apologized," she said quietly, "and I am safe. Let it be, please." It was the please that did it, the gentle request that reminded Thaddeus that this was not just about his anger or his need to protect. Rebecca had a right to her own feelings about what had happened, and she was choosing forgiveness over vengeance. "You are lucky she is more forgiving than I am," Thaddeus told Tom. "But if I ever hear of you leaving another woman in danger like that, apologize or not, I will make sure you never work as a guide in this territory again." Tom nodded quickly and scurried away, and Thaddeus turned to Rebecca. "I am sorry if I overstepped. I just could not stand the thought of him not facing consequences for what he did." "I appreciate you wanting to defend me," Rebecca said, "but I learned a long time ago that holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it." Tom was wrong, but he acknowledged it, and that is enough for me. It was moments like these that made Thaddeus realize how much he was coming to care for Rebecca. She was strong in ways he had not expected, strong not because she was hard, but because she was resilient, able to bend without breaking. By the end of July, Thaddeus knew that he wanted to marry Rebecca. It was not just that she was beautiful, though he had come to see the beauty in her face and form. It was not just that she was practical and hardworking, though those qualities mattered. It was that when he was with her, the loneliness that had haunted him for 3 years simply vanished. She made him laugh, made him think, made him want to be better than he was. But he needed to know that she felt the same way, that she was not just agreeing to marry him because she had traveled all this way and had nowhere else to go. He planned carefully, waiting for the right moment. It came on a Sunday afternoon in early August. The town was holding a social at the church, and Rebecca had helped Martha bake pies for the occasion. After the meal, when people were milling about and talking, Thaddeus asked Rebecca if she would walk with him. They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and Thaddeus turned to face her. His heart was pounding in a way it had not since he was a young man courting his first sweetheart back before the war. "Rebecca," he began, then stopped, unsure how to put into words what he was feeling. "These last few weeks have been the happiest I have had in 3 years, maybe longer than that. You make me remember what it is like to have something to look forward to, someone to share things with. I know we started this as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became more than that for me. It became real." Rebecca's eyes were bright with emotion, and she reached out to take his hand. "It became real for me too. I am not a romantic man, Thaddeus continued. I cannot promise you an easy life or a big house or fancy things. But I can promise you that I will work every day to make you happy, to build a life with you that is worth the journey you made to get here. Rebecca Rothman, will you marry me? Not because of a letter or an arrangement, but because we choose each other. Yes, Rebecca said, and there were tears on her cheeks now. Yes, Thaddeus, I will marry you. He kissed her then, his first kiss in years, and it felt like coming home. They were married a week later in the little whitewashed church, with Martha and Reverend Matthews as witnesses. Rebecca wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric. Martha helped her purchase, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Thaddeus wore his best shirt and trousers, and he had even shaved and gotten a haircut for the occasion. The ceremony was short, the words familiar and ancient, binding them together in the sight of God and the community. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Thaddeus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not even known he was carrying. He was no longer alone. He had a partner, a wife, someone to build a future with. They rode back to the ranch together in the late afternoon sun, Rebecca sitting beside him on the wagon seat, her hand in his. The house looked different to Thaddeus now, no longer a lonely bachelor dwelling but a home where two people would live together. It is not much, he said as he helped Rebecca down from the wagon, but it is sturdy and it is ours. It is perfect, Rebecca said, and the way she said it made him believe she meant it. That first night as husband and wife was awkward and sweet and fumbling. Two people learning each other in the darkness, finding their way toward intimacy. But there was laughter too, and tenderness, and by the time they fell asleep in each other's arms, Thaddeus felt a contentment he had never known before. The next morning they woke to the reality of ranching life. There were chores to be done, cattle to check, fences to mend. But now there were two of them to share the work, and Rebecca proved herself capable beyond Thaddeus's expectations. She could not rope or brand, but she could ride well enough to help move cattle from one pasture to another. She could not shoe a horse, but she could hold the animal steady while Thaddeus worked. She could not mend a fence, but she could carry tools and fetch water and make meals that were ready when the work was done. More than that, she brought organization to the ranch that had been lacking. She set up a proper kitchen with storage for supplies. She planted a garden that would provide vegetables through the fall. And she began keeping accounts in a ledger book, tracking expenses and income in a way Thaddeus never had. "You are making me look bad," he teased her one evening as they sat together going over the accounts. "I have been running this place by the seat of my pants for 3 years. You have been surviving," Rebecca corrected gently. "Now we are going to make it thrive," and thrive it did. With two people working together, they were able to accomplish more than Thaddeus had managed alone. They repaired buildings that had fallen into disrepair. They improved the irrigation to the pastures, and they even managed to purchase a small herd of additional cattle from a rancher who was selling out and moving back east. By fall, the Rocking Z Ranch was beginning to look like a proper operation again. More importantly, the house felt like a home. Rebecca had sewn curtains for the windows and made cushions for the chairs. She had hung pictures on the walls and put flowers in jars on the table. The loft, which had been used for storage, was now a proper bedroom with a real bed and quilt she had made herself. But it was not just the physical changes that mattered. It was the sound of two voices in conversation over breakfast. It was having someone to share the sunset with after a long day of work. It was the way Rebecca would reach for Thaddeus's hand when they sat together in the evening, a simple gesture that said more than words ever could. In November, Rebecca told Thaddeus she was pregnant. They were sitting by the fire after supper, and she said it simply, without preamble. "I am going to have a baby. Sometime in late spring, I think." Thaddeus felt his heart skip a beat. A baby. A child. He had not let himself think that far ahead, had been so focused on getting through each day that he had not considered what building a future really meant. But now, looking at Rebecca's face in the firelight, he felt a joy so intense it almost frightened him. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, needing to know. "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Rebecca admitted. "I do not know much about being a mother, and I know having a baby out here will not be easy. But yes, I am happy." "Are you?" "I am more than happy," Thaddeus said, pulling her into his arms. "I am grateful. For you, for this child, for this life we are building. Sometimes I still cannot believe you are real, that you walked into my barn that night and turned everything upside down. I still cannot believe you almost shot me," Rebecca said, and they both laughed at the memory. Winter came hard that year, with snows that drifted high against the house and temperatures that plunged below zero. But Thaddeus had prepared better than in previous years, with plenty of hay stored for the cattle and wood stacked for the fire. Inside the house, he and Rebecca waited out the storms together, passing the time with conversation and books and plans for the future. Rebecca spent hours sewing baby clothes, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. Thaddeus built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. They talked about names, about how they would manage with a baby when there was so much work to be done, about whether they should hire help for the busy season. In February, a warm spell brought Reverend Matthews and Martha out to the ranch for a visit. They brought news from town, gossip about who was courting whom and which businesses were succeeding or failing. But mostly, they came to check on Rebecca and see how she was managing her pregnancy. "You look well," Martha said, her experienced eye assessing Rebecca's condition. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Rebecca admitted, "and my back aches something terrible some days. But overall, I cannot complain. Thaddeus has been wonderful. He is looking better than I have seen him in years," Reverend Matthews observed later, when he and Thaddeus were outside tending to the horses. "Marriage suits you, my friend." "It does," Thaddeus agreed. "I never thought I could be this happy. Some days I worry that something will happen to take it all away." "That is a natural fear," the Reverend said, "but you cannot let fear of loss prevent you from fully embracing what you have. Love always involves risk. The key is to trust in God and in each other." As winter gave way to spring, Rebecca grew larger and more uncomfortable. She could no longer help with the outdoor work, and some days she could barely manage the household tasks. Thaddeus hired a young man from town, a 18-year-old named Sam, to help with the spring branding and fence mending. This freed Thaddeus to stay closer to the house, ready to help Rebecca if she needed him. The baby came on a warm day in late May, just as the wildflowers were blooming across the hills. Martha had come to stay at the ranch for the final weeks, and it was her capable hands that guided Rebecca through the long hours of labor. Thaddeus paced outside, helpless and terrified by the sounds coming from the bedroom. Sam tried to distract him with talk of cattle and weather, but nothing could ease the knot of fear in Thaddeus's stomach. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Martha emerged from the bedroom, her face weary but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy with good lungs, and Rebecca did wonderfully. She is tired, but she is fine. You can go in now." Thaddeus entered the bedroom with shaking legs. Rebecca lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made, and as Thaddeus approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal a small, red face with eyes scrunched shut. "Meet your son," Rebecca said softly. Thaddeus reached out with one calloused finger and touched the baby's cheek, marveling at the softness of the skin. "He is so small." "He will grow," Rebecca said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed this during the winter, going through family names and favorites. Now, looking at his son's face, Thaddeus knew what felt right. "Thomas, after my father, Thomas Rothman Zane." "That is perfect," Rebecca said. The next months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausting days. Thomas was a demanding baby, needing to be fed every few hours and crying with impressive volume when he was not happy. But he was healthy and strong, and watching him grow became Thaddeus's greatest joy. Rebecca managed motherhood with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything else, though Thaddeus could see the toll it took on her. She was always tired, always busy, always putting the baby's needs before her own. He tried to help as much as he could, taking Thomas in the evenings so Rebecca could rest, learning to change diapers and walk the floor when the baby was fussy. Sam proved to be a reliable ranch hand, and by the end of summer, Thaddeus was able to hire him on permanently. This meant that Thaddeus could spend more time near the house, helping Rebecca with Thomas and the household, while Sam handled more of the outdoor work. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, they had settled into a routine that worked for all of them. The ranch was doing better than it had in years, with a strong herd and good grass after a wet spring. The house was full of life, with baby laughter and the ordinary sounds of a family going about their daily business. One evening in late October, after Thomas was asleep, and Sam had gone to the bunkhouse they had built for him, Thaddeus and Rebecca sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the hills. The air was cool but not yet cold, and Rebecca leaned against Thaddeus's shoulder, her hand in his. "Do you ever think about that night I showed up in your barn?" she asked. "All the time," Thaddeus said. "I think about what might have happened if I had actually shot you, or if I had turned you away and sent you back to town." "I would have been devastated," Rebecca admitted. "I had put everything I had into getting here. If you had rejected me, I do not know what I would have done." "I am glad I did not," Thaddeus said. "I am glad the mail did not get through, glad you showed up unannounced, glad everything happened exactly the way it did. Because all of it led us here to this moment, to this life." "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Rebecca asked. "The solitude you had before?" Thaddeus considered the question seriously. There were moments when he missed the simplicity of his old life, the freedom to work on his own schedule without worrying about anyone else. But those moments were fleeting and rare. "No," he said finally. "I do not miss it at all. I thought I was fine alone, but I was just surviving, not living." "You taught me the difference." "You taught me some things too," Rebecca said. "You taught me that I was stronger than I thought I was, that I could build a life in a place I had never been, with a person I had never met. You taught me what it means to be a true partner." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, Thomas made a small noise in his sleep, and they both smiled at the sound. "I want more," Rebecca said suddenly. "More what?" Thaddeus asked. "More children, more life, more of everything. I want to fill this house with babies and laughter. I want to grow old with you here, watching the seasons change and our children grow. I want to build something that lasts." "Then that is what we will do," Thaddeus said, kissing the top of her head. "We will build it together." The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Rebecca had been right about wanting more children. Over the next 7 years, they had 3 more. A daughter named Lillian, another son they called Henry, and finally another daughter, Grace. The house that had once seemed too large for one person was now filled to bursting with the noise and chaos of family life. Thaddeus expanded the ranch with each passing year, hiring more hands and increasing the herd. The Rocking Z became known as one of the better operations in the area, a place where the cattle were healthy and the owners were fair. Sam eventually married a girl from town and moved into his own place on the edge of the ranch, though he continued to work for Thaddeus as foreman. Rebecca became a central figure in the community around Pinon. She organized sewing circles and helped newcomers settle into frontier life. She taught Sunday school at the church and served meals to drifters who came through town hungry. Her reputation for kindness and practical wisdom spread, and people sought her advice on everything from how to treat a fever to how to handle a difficult neighbor. Through it all, the love between Rebecca and Thaddeus deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, their hard days, their moments of frustration with each other and with life. But they always came back to the fundamental truth that they were partners, that they had chosen each other and would continue choosing each other every day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thaddeus took Rebecca into town for a celebration dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a rare evening without the children, who were staying with Martha and the Reverend. They sat across from each other at a small table, looking more or less the same as they had a decade before, though both bore the marks of hard work and good living. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Thaddeus asked as they finished their meal. "When I asked what you were doing in my barn. I told you I was not a thief," Rebecca said, smiling at the memory, "though I am not sure you believed me at the time." "I did not," Thaddeus admitted. "I thought you were trouble, which I suppose you were, just not the kind I expected." "The good kind of trouble, the best kind," Thaddeus agreed. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I have been thinking lately about all the ways my life could have gone differently. If my father had not died, if I had not written that letter, if the mail had gotten through properly and I had known you were coming, any one of those things being different would have changed everything." "Do you wish things had gone differently?" Rebecca asked. "Not for a single moment," Thaddeus said. "Every hardship, every mistake, every twist of fate led me to you, and you are worth all of it. You always will be." Rebecca's eyes were bright with tears. "You are going to make me cry, and I worked hard on this dress. I do not want to ruin it with tears." "Then let me say one more thing, and then I will stop being sentimental," Thaddeus said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who almost shot you. Thank you for staying when you could have left. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you, Rebecca, more now than the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "Now I am definitely crying," Rebecca said, wiping at her eyes. "But they are happy tears, so I suppose that is all right." They walked back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, riding slowly and savoring the quiet. When they arrived home, the house was dark and still, the children still in town. They went to bed together and held each other, not speaking, just being present in the moment. The next morning, life returned to normal, children to feed, animals to tend, work to be done. But there was joy in the routine, purpose in the labor. This was what they had built together, a life that mattered, a family that thrived, a love that endured. As Thomas grew older, he began helping more around the ranch, learning from his father the skills he would need to run the operation one day. Lillian showed a talent for raising chickens and managing the garden, while Henry had a natural way with horses that impressed even Sam. Little Grace was still too young to have defined interests, but she followed her siblings everywhere, determined not to be left out. One afternoon in the summer when Thomas was 10, he came running to the house where Rebecca was preserving peaches. "Mother, there is a woman on the road. She looks lost and her horse is limping." Rebecca felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She wiped her hands on her apron and went outside, shading her eyes against the sun. Sure enough, there was a figure on the road, leading a lame horse. History repeating itself, she thought. She called for Thaddeus, who was working in the barn, and together they rode out to meet the woman. She was young, maybe 21 or 22, with red hair and a face full of freckles. Her dress was dusty from travel, and she looked exhausted. "Can we help you?" Rebecca asked kindly. "I hope so," the woman said. "I am looking for the Morrison Ranch. I was told it was in this area, but I think I took a wrong turn somewhere, and then my horse started favoring his left front leg." "The Morrison place is about 5 miles east of here," Thaddeus said. "Your horse probably just picked up a stone. I can check him for you." While Thaddeus examined the horse's hoof and removed a wedged stone, Rebecca talked with the woman. Her name was Sarah, and she had come from Kansas to marry Peter Morrison, a young rancher she had been corresponding with for 8 months. "Does he know you are coming today?" Rebecca asked. "I sent a letter, but I am not sure if he received it," Sarah said. "The mail out here seems to be unreliable." Rebecca and Thaddeus exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. "It can be," Rebecca agreed, "but I am sure it will work out fine. Would you like to rest here for a bit before continuing on? I have lemonade and fresh bread." Sarah accepted gratefully, and as they walked back to the house, Rebecca told her about her own arrival in New Mexico, about showing up unannounced in Thaddeus's barn. Sarah laughed at the story, some of her nervousness easing. "So it worked out well for you?" she asked hopefully. "Better than I ever imagined," Rebecca said, looking at Thaddeus with affection. "It was not always easy, but it was always worth it." After Sarah rested and ate, Thaddeus offered to ride with her to the Morrison place to make sure she arrived safely. Rebecca watched them go, then turned back to her preserving with a smile. How strange life was, how it circled back on itself in unexpected ways. That evening, when Thaddeus returned, he reported that Peter Morrison had indeed been expecting Sarah, but not for another week. He had been surprised but delighted by her early arrival, and Thaddeus had left them getting acquainted in Morrison's modest cabin. "You think they will be as happy as we are?" Thomas asked. He had been listening to the story with great interest. "I hope so," Thaddeus said. "But happiness in marriage takes work and luck in equal measure. Your mother and I have been lucky, but we have also worked hard at loving each other." "That seems like a good kind of work," Thomas observed. "The best kind," Thaddeus agreed, meeting Rebecca's eyes across the table. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resolve and winters that pushed them to their limits. There were illnesses that frightened them and accidents that reminded them how fragile life could be. But there were also harvests of plenty, seasons of prosperity, and moments of pure joy that made everything worthwhile. When Thomas turned 18, he began taking on more responsibility for the ranch, working side by side with his father to manage the growing operation. Lillian surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher and began corresponding with a normal school in Santa Fe. Henry showed signs of following in Sam's footsteps as a horseman, already earning money breaking and training horses for neighbors. Grace, now 11, was the wild one, the child who climbed trees and caught snakes and refused to be confined to traditional girl activities. Rebecca saw something of herself in Grace, that determination to forge her own path regardless of what others expected. On a warm evening in May, nearly 20 years after Rebecca had first arrived at the ranch, she and Thaddeus sat on their porch watching another sunset. Their hair was graying now, their faces lined with the evidence of years spent outdoors, but their hands still fit together the same way they always had. "You ever think about that night?" Thaddeus asked, the question that had become something of a tradition between them. "Every day," Rebecca said. "I think about how scared I was, how uncertain. I think about seeing you in that barn doorway with your rifle, and how I thought my adventure was going to end before it began. I think about how close I came to sending you away," Thaddeus said. "How I almost let fear and stubbornness rob me of the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you did not," Rebecca reminded him. "You took a chance on a stranger who broke your barn window. You gave me time to prove myself. You opened your heart when you could have kept it closed." "Best decision I ever made," Thaddeus said. From inside the house came the sounds of their children: Thomas discussing ranch business with Sam, Lillian reading to Grace from one of her teaching books, Henry playing a tune on the harmonica someone had given him. It was the sound of life, of family, of the legacy they had built together. "You remember when you told me you wanted to fill this house with babies and laughter?" Thaddeus asked. "I do," Rebecca said. "Have I succeeded?" "Beyond my wildest dreams," Thaddeus said. "This house has never been empty since the day you walked into my barn. It has been full of love and noise and life. Everything I never knew I needed. Everything I hoped to find when I left St. Louis," Rebecca said. "A partner, a home, a purpose. I found all of that and more." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first awkward conversations, their wedding, the births of their children, and all the ordinary and extraordinary moments in between. "What do you think happens next?" Rebecca asked. "We have built so much, raised 4 children, made the ranch prosper. What comes after this? Grandchildren, I hope," Thaddeus said. "And quiet years where we get to enjoy what we have built without quite so much hard labor. And growing old together, watching the seasons change and remembering all the ways we have been blessed." "That sounds perfect," Rebecca said. "It does it not?" Thaddeus agreed. He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. Inside, Grace called out that supper was ready, and they reluctantly stood to go inside. But before they did, Thaddeus turned to Rebecca and kissed her, a kiss that carried 20 years of love and commitment and partnership. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what? For everything. For showing up. For staying. For building this life with me. For being exactly who I needed, even when I did not know what that was. Thank you for not shooting me," Rebecca said with a smile, "and for everything after that." They went inside together, hand in hand, to join their children for supper. The table was crowded and noisy, everyone talking at once, sharing news and jokes and plans. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle or the successful ranch, but these people, this family, this love that had grown from a chance encounter on a lonely night in June. Years later, when Thomas married and brought his own bride to the ranch, when Lillian finished her teaching training and opened a school in Pinyon, when Henry started his own horse breeding operation, and when Grace finally settled down with a veterinarian who could match her wild spirit, Thaddeus and Rebecca could look back on their lives with satisfaction. They had started with almost nothing: a lonely rancher, a desperate bride, a confused beginning, but they had built everything that mattered. They had turned a practical arrangement into a love story, a struggling ranch into a thriving operation, a house into a home. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had first been married. Reverend Matthews had long since passed, but the new minister conducted the ceremony with reverence, acknowledging the remarkable partnership he was witnessing. 30 years ago, Thaddeus said in his vows, I thought I was getting a housekeeper and a helper. Instead, I got a partner, a best friend, and the love of my life. Rebecca, you have made every day of these 30 years better than the one before. I promise to love you for 30 more and then 30 more after that for as long as God gives us." 30 years ago, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face, I arrived here scared and uncertain, hoping for a chance at a new life. You gave me that and so much more. You taught me what it means to be truly loved, truly valued, truly seen. I promise to keep choosing you every day, to keep building this life with you, to keep loving you with everything I have. Their children cheered, and their grandchildren clapped, and as Thaddeus kissed Rebecca, everyone in the church knew they were witnessing something rare and precious. A love that had not just survived but thrived, growing stronger with each passing year. The party afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food prepared by friends and family. Music played, and people danced, and Thaddeus led Rebecca in a waltz under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story so many years before. "I love you," he said as they moved together to the music. "I have loved you since the day you walked into my barn looking like a refugee. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Rebecca said. "You saved my life that night, though I did not realize it at the time. Not just by not shooting me, but by giving me a chance to become who I was meant to be." "You saved mine too," Thaddeus said. "I was dying of loneliness and I did not even know it. You brought me back to life." As the night wore on and the party continued around them, they stood together at the edge of the celebration, watching their children and grandchildren dance and laugh and live. This was what they had created together: a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told for generations. "Do you think anyone will remember our story?" Rebecca asked. "Years from now when we are gone? I think our grandchildren will tell their grandchildren about the night a desperate woman broke into a barn and changed everything," Thaddeus said. "I think they will tell them about the rancher who almost shot his future wife, about the couple who built a life from nothing, about the love that started in confusion and grew into something unshakable." "I hope they tell it right," Rebecca said. "I hope they understand that it was not always easy, that we worked for what we have, that love is as much about choosing each other every day as it is about feeling." "They will," Thaddeus assured her, "because we are going to show them, every day we have left, what real love looks like." And they did. For another 15 years they lived and loved and worked together. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren, and remained active in the community around Pinyon. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, but Thaddeus and Rebecca never stopped being involved, never stopped working side by side. When Rebecca fell ill in their 45th year of marriage, Thaddeus cared for her with the same devotion he had shown throughout their life together. He sat by her bedside, holding her hand, telling her stories of their years together, reminding her of all they had built. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked him one afternoon when the pain was particularly bad. "Not a single one," Thaddeus said firmly. "Except maybe that I did not have more time with you. 100 years would not have been enough." "It has been enough for me," Rebecca said. "More than enough. I got to live a life I never imagined possible. I got to love and be loved by an extraordinary man. I got to build something that will last long after we are gone. How could I have regrets about that?" She passed peacefully one morning in early spring, with Thaddeus holding her hand and their children gathered around. Her last words were to Thaddeus: "Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this life." Thaddeus lived for 3 more years after Rebecca's death, long enough to see Thomas's youngest son born, long enough to ensure that the ranch would continue to thrive, long enough to write down the story of how he met Rebecca so that future generations would know the truth of it. He died in his sleep on a quiet night in June, almost exactly 48 years after Rebecca had first walked into his barn. When they buried him next to Rebecca in the cemetery in Pinyon, the entire town turned out, along with family who came from as far away as California and Texas. At the funeral, Thomas read from his father's written account of meeting Rebecca. He told the story of the woman who was mistaken for a thief, of the lonely rancher who almost sent her away, of the love that grew between them against all odds. "My parents taught me that the best things in life often come when we least expect them," Thomas said. "That love is not about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to build something together despite imperfections. That family is not just blood, but the bonds we forge through shared work and shared joy and shared sorrow." They taught us that a chance encounter can change everything, that fear should not prevent us from opening our hearts, that the strongest foundations are built on honesty and partnership and mutual respect. They taught us that love is not passive but active, not a feeling but a choice we make every single day. And they taught us that from the smallest beginnings, the most extraordinary things can grow. A lonely rancher and a desperate bride became partners, then lovers, then the foundation of a family that now spans 4 generations. That is the legacy they leave us, not just land or property or success, but an example of what love can do when given the chance to flourish. The Rocking Z Ranch continued for generations after Thaddeus and Rebecca passed, remaining in the family and growing with each successive generation. But more than the land, what endured was the story of how it all began, the tale that was told at family gatherings and passed down to new brides and grooms as an example of what marriage could be. The barn where Rebecca first encountered Thaddeus was preserved, even when the rest of the buildings were modernized. A small plaque was placed there, commemorating the night when 2 lives collided and transformed each other. In the house, now expanded and updated but still recognizable, the cradle Thaddeus made for Thomas was kept in a place of honor, used by each new generation of babies. The quilts Rebecca sewed were carefully preserved, brought out for special occasions, tangible reminders of her skill and dedication. But the greatest legacy was not in objects or land. It was in the values that Thaddeus and Rebecca had lived: hard work, mutual respect, open hearts, and the courage to take chances on people and possibilities. Every generation of Zanes learned those values, lived them, and passed them on. And on quiet summer nights, when the desert air was warm and the stars hung bright over New Mexico, family members would still gather on the porch and tell the story. They would talk about the woman who was mistaken for a thief, about the man who could have sent her away but chose to give her a chance, about the love that grew from confusion and became unshakable. It was a story worth telling, a legacy worth preserving, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That broken barn windows and mistaken identity can lead to love. That loneliness can be transformed into fullness. That 2 people choosing each other every day can build something that lasts not just a lifetime but generations. That was the story of Thaddeus Zane and Rebecca Rothman, the lonely rancher and the bride he almost sent away, whose love story began with fear and confusion but ended in joy and completion. It was a story that proved love could conquer doubt, that partnership could overcome hardship, and that sometimes the person you almost shoot turns out to be the person you were meant to spend your life with. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not how they began, but what they built together, and how their love continued to echo through the lives of everyone they touched, long after they were gone.